Says one of the challenges of youth ministry is we push leaders to move up the ladder rather than seeing if they're called to youth ministry. How can we change the mindset of moving up and affirming a call to youth ministry and getting salaries up so they can stay in that role? That's a good question. My comments earlier were not directed at, hey, don't be a youth pastor, move up. Just that sometimes that's the easiest way to get a raise, but that doesn't mean that that's the solution. So what do you guys think? What can youth pastors do to maybe change that mindset, particularly in the church where they're serving right now?
I mean, I think as someone who's moved from student ministry into a campus pastor role and believing I was a youth ministry lifer, and then God said, psych, and moved me into this new role. I think that when I think about this question, I think what was really interesting is that one slide you showed of how regions pay youth pastors, because the reality is I think in the same way how when you think of a small business and they hire their first employee, they have to take into consideration, can they afford that employee? I don't think churches necessarily think that way. I think churches often think of we have to have a youth pastor, we have to have a worship pastor. And so they go and try to find those people and not pay them at all what they should pay. And then and this question got brought up, they kind of disguise it under a housing allowance and all this other stuff to make the pay feel like it's more than it really is. And so therefore, it gets kind of caught up into this messy situation where I believe, unfortunately, the other side said that a easy way to get a pay bump is to actually go to another church. And so, because when you go from one church to another church, you actually might get a small raise simply by moving along. And the question then remains is, how does the church view student ministry? If it's on par with the same value they have with an associate pastor or a worship pastor, then that will be, the fruit of that will be a pay raise. I think oftentimes when you see youth pastors who've been in youth ministry for 10 years or 15 years, and they've only had a $2,000 increase over that entire span, the only solution would be to then go into a role where you are a family pastor with influence over student ministry, or some sort what a lot of multi-site churches are doing is they'll have an umbrella head in youth ministry over a bunch of youth pastors. And so therefore it turns into more of a mentoring role. And those are actually more executive roles in a church with the focus on student ministry. What we're doing now is getting very, very niche of what these roles are. So those positions, there's only a handful of those positions in the country that exist, right? And those youth pastors, I'm imagining, are getting paid well, but unfortunately, it's there's no incentive for a youth pastor to stay in their church as a youth pastor over a long time unless they value student ministry. And that's kind of the state of the problem of how the church views student ministry. It's a thing we have to do. It helps bring families to the church, but it's not really involved into the discipleship program or the emphasis of who they are. It's really the North Points that really say youth ministry is the reason why church exists, and have this high view of student ministry that where you see youth workers really stay a long time and they get paid really, really well. At least that's what I feel it's anecdotally.